Joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline is John Kinney. He is a lawyer here in Omaha. John, thanks for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
I got to figure it out because as sharp as you are, so did you concede the Mason Kinney, or like how did that come around? Like, I'm a guy whose name doesn't have to come first. I imagine you're in the same vein.
You put me on the spot.
No, I'm
right
I'm totally kidding. Like, it's funny because I remember you always would like coach me through my ego, so it was just like, isn't that funny? Like the mentor mentee, man. Good to talk to you. How you been?
I'm doing great, and Jill is smarter and prettier than me, so her name should come first, but it doesn't.
But you wear the sharp specs, John. I mean, you look so distinguished.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Good morning, man. I haven't changed a bit.
Not at all.
So this one is interesting, right? And it's kind of cool because you're really good at what you do, obviously. But there's a sports component to you. Obviously, you stay kind of up on things. Did you anticipate, or could you have seen these two worlds colliding when you're kind of reading through this case?
Absolutely. This is a case with a lot of bells and whistles. It has a lot of context and details to it that are really, really interesting. And I think this is one of those things that is going to come down to depositions and witnesses and the nuance of the facts. And that's what's great about the law. So yeah, no, this is a very interesting case.
John, I think one of the things that makes it most interesting, at least from my standpoint and kind of understanding of what I've read so far, is obviously the term grooming was used here, which you typically hear when a minor's involved, but because of the power dynamics between a player and coach, you almost have sort of a minor type of relationship, even though they're both adults. How does that kind of play into this whole situation? And how do you, I guess, prove something like that in a civil case?
Well, when I look at a lawsuit, I like to change the facts a little bit to sort of play with the ideas that are in the case. And so if you just change the facts a little bit of this case and say that, Ashley Scoggin is 15, whoa, that changes everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not what's happening here. So let's say she's 17 or 18. Does that change how people feel or how people think about it? And if you read the online comments, there's a lot of folks out there saying, hey, she was an adult and she could, make decisions on her own. And I don't know. When you think about a 22 or 23-year-old person, they're not exactly mature, and the power dynamics definitely had to play a part here. So I think that grooming is a word that we've all gotten very used to, and it immediately sends us to the Sandusky case and things like that. Now those victims were obviously much younger, but there is something to be said for the power dynamic of somebody who can manage your playing time, who can, as they said in the lawsuit, make or break you. So I think that's a big component of this.
John, are we essentially looking at what would amount to a workplace sexual harassment complaint? Is that kind of like nuts and bolts sort of what this ends up being?
Yeah, so when you look at a case like this, there's just a huge body of law from the employment context where a manager or a supervisor has a role in promoting or making big career decisions for an employee sort of underneath their management. And you can use the facts of those cases and the law that's developed in those cases to sort of create a template for this case. and there is, if you look at this case, there's allegations of retaliation. There are going to be controversies over actual knowledge, and when somebody knew something and how they knew it, and it'll be so interesting to see these other student athletes. What did they say to what coaches, and how are they going to prove that there was actual knowledge of this relationship? But you can just see in the phrasing of the lawsuit that it's clearly hearkening back to all of the jurisprudence from these sexual harassment cases that occur in the workplace.
So, John, as you're kind of reading through this, and you're super smart, you win way more than you lose. I got the sense that the picture is being painted more about the environment than the details. Is that a more sympathetic play when you're going to go for something civil, is how something made someone feel versus what may or may not have actually happened?
Well, that can kind of be more of a damages issue. And so it's sort of like the humiliation and the pain and suffering is part of the damages claim. But when I read the lawsuit, I think the boring part of the lawsuit is really interesting. The part of the lawsuit that says there weren't policies that were appropriately developed, there wasn't any mechanism.
Well, okay, so did they have to be divulged? Because that would be something that's easy for the university to dispel, because there would probably be handbooks. There are things that people sign when you take on scholarships. Like, what if that was in writing later on, though, JK?
So Title IX requires schools to adopt and publish grievance procedures, and that's mentioned in the lawsuit. And those grievance procedures, according to the lawsuit, were not well developed. And according to the lawsuit, again, these are just allegations, the university did not promulgate specific enough policies for a student athlete who felt like they were being sexually harassed or even, sexually assaulted. The mechanisms were not in place. You can just see in the lawsuit that just beyond the allegations related to the coach student athlete relationship, there's a lot of time, a lot of ink spilled on the issue of these policies and procedures not being developed. And then you get into, once the assault, or not the assault, but the harassment is sort of disclosed, then there's, again, harkening back to these sexual harassment cases, there's this reference to, retaliation and not creating, dismissing her from the team. Is that an appropriate response? And dismissing her immediately, is that an appropriate response? And I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I do think that there is a lot of grist for the mill. There's a lot of information in this lawsuit that's not the sexy part of it, that's not the titillating part of it, that's really going to be the interesting part of the case.
So, John, if you're talking about depositions, obviously the team could play a pivotal role, right? So as I'm reading through, and I didn't get through all 20 some odd pages, but the factual content where you talk about, hey, a player meeting, or the players devised a ruse to get a key, something like that. And I don't want to get into the sensationalism of it more than I want to say, apparently it comes across as though the team had picked sides of culpability, right? You're not trying to necessarily, it doesn't read as though you're out to get the coach. It reads as though there was an effort to pin the player. Do you read into that at all potentially as legal counsel when depositions loom? Like, why does it seem like them against you?
Well, definitely as a lawyer, you look at it and say, wow, all these witnesses are going to be lined up against my plaintiff, because
right.
It sounds like people did pick sides. And, it's hard to find.
It reads that way.
It reads that way. But but that's the great thing about the law. We're going to, depositions are going to get taken, and people are going to, a case can turn on a few phrases uttered in a deposition. And there may be folks out there that are supportive of Ashley Scoggin that we just haven't heard from yet. It does seem to be, and I kind of thought of the movie Mean Girls, and that's not appropriate, but it made me think it's like a group of girls got together and decided that Ashley Scoggin was to blame for this in some way, and it kind of struck me as kind of a, I don't know, a group mentality that maybe kind of went awry, and maybe in hindsight, people might look at it and think differently about how they behaved and the way they approached it. But she was definitely getting blamed for this relationship, and probably had more to do with, the violation of team chemistry and, hey, we're a team and we want to win, and this is taking us away from winning, which I think, when you're in that super, super competitive environment, that probably takes over. And then maybe as time goes on, you look back and reflect on it and say, well, yeah, maybe we were prioritizing a few of the wrong things here.
We're talking with John Kinney, a lawyer and partner at Kinney Mason Law Firm here in Omaha. John, one of the things that really jumped out to me, and you mentioned this in your response to DB here, was the difference in the way Chuck Love was handled versus the way Ashley Scoggin was handled. Obviously, she was kicked off the team pretty much immediately, where Chuck Love was suspended with pay until he ultimately resigned later on. How big of a role in this civil case do you think that's going to end up playing? Because that's the thing that really perked my ears up, was how those two situations were handled differently.
Well, one of the things that's interesting about that whole scenario is there's hardly any gap in time between when there was a discovery of this relationship and Ashley Scoggin being released from the team. And you would think that there would be a few days of at least an investigation. There would be some sort of an effort to interview all the team members separately to it seems like that there was such a rush, and I'm not sure what's going to happen in terms of the facts that are developed about this hours-long team meeting and people screaming at each other. I'm not sure that that's going to, actually come out to be completely accurate. But the timing just doesn't make a lot of sense for an organization and for a team and the leadership that is supposed to have these grievance procedures for these decisions to be made so rapidly. It's not adding up. And again, by the time you get to developing the factual record, it may be that there are a lot of procedures that were undertaken to investigate this, but the time frame between discovery and dismissals and big decisions, it doesn't seem like there was a lot of time for quiet reflection. It seems like there was a lot of heat and very little light on that.
And I understand, John, that these are just allegations, but I think the main point in wanting to talk to you is just to talk about kind of the legal ramifications, not necessarily forming opinions. So as I'm kind of looking at this, if in fact you're accurate in terms of how you would look at this, the timeline, the immediacy of playing versus not playing versus Coach Love's suspension with pay, would you look at, and I know you're human, but you do know the law, but would at first blush, would you think, is this contractual that they can't get rid of him immediately? Do we not think he didn't do anything wrong necessarily because we can't get rid of him immediately? Or is it because the policies are in place via Title IX that in accordance that we can't get rid of him immediately? Do you look at why there was the delay as you're looking at the allegations presented to you?
I don't really think that is a notable element to this. I look much more towards the plaintiff and Ashley Scoggin and what happened to her, how they handled, Chuck Love. you can criticize it in hindsight and say, geez, the guy got paid through May and got to finish the semester, getting paid and whatnot. But in the grand scheme, I just don't think there's, a lot there on that.
I just wonder if that was upsetting to Scoggin's side, where, wait a minute, you handled me like this, but he got to do this. Do you know what I mean? I'm just looking for the catalyst.
Yeah, I think it's more of an issue for talk radio and chat rooms from a legal perspective. It doesn't really resonate. But I think I understand why people would talk about the differences, because there's already this super big power imbalance that's being discussed in the lawsuit itself. And then together with that power imbalance, all of a sudden you see two people being treated, potentially differently, and it piques everybody's interest. But from the legal perspective, I hardly think it matters.
Whoa. So that's why we're talking, see, because I think that's huge, right? Because what you preface it by saying, I think that's more for talk radio and chat rooms. So even as somebody that's really good amongst the tops in your profession, you think the differences in the way that the two people were handled is not very relevant as it pertains to the facts?
Well, the guy got suspended.
That's interesting.
And he no longer got to participate as a coach of the team. And that happened immediately. The only thing that seems to be chapping everybody is the fact that he got paid for the next 3 or 4 months. I just don't. I'm not. They both got kicked off. And so I don't. I don't really.
So you don't make a huge difference between dismissed and suspended. That's what this comes down to, right?
I like the objectivity, because it would be easy from a legal standpoint to pick a side, but you're just being global and
I
saying
think it's an emotional issue.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah.
So legally, the difference between being suspended and eventually resigning versus being immediately kicked off the team, not significant. That's basically
not significant with respect to the overall lawsuit
handling of
trying to prove the elements of your claim.
Sure.
In other words, if you're Ashley Scoggin's lawyer, you don't spend a lot of time thinking about how they handled Chuck Love. I mean, you maybe bring it up in a closing argument, or you try to tell some fact finder that it seemed patently unfair. But in terms of proving the elements of your claim, I just don't see it being one of those things that is part of the elements of what you're trying to do with these constitutional claims, these 1983 actions, the Title IX claim. It's not. It's interesting, but I wouldn't focus on it.
It's clear that Title IX has taken on a different role, a different meaning, different depth than I think its original intent. And it is very, I mean, you have to really be well versed as it's kind of morphed through the decades. Do you see why maybe there was a 2-year gap? Do you look at why there was a 2-year gap? Is it due diligence? Is it things change? What if you were going to take this case, would you ask that question?
Well, the problem with any gap between the events and when you eventually file a lawsuit is that your lawsuit is going to create its own gaps, and lawsuits take years to resolve. And so people's memories fade, evidence disappears, people die, people move, and so you want to try to bring a claim as quickly as you can. But I think in this case, you're talking about a case that could have a huge psychological impact on a still a very young lady, and the amount of heat and victim blaming and the kind of pressure. I think somebody has to really, really think hard about that before they bite that off. And it's not something that you do without a lot of careful planning and thinking about what's going to happen to your life. And so I think that's probably more of an explanation for the delay than anything else.
John, I had one thing that you brought up a couple times, the the Title IX requirements in terms of having paths forward to have policies for these complaints and how to deal with these. But one of the things that the suit alleges is that Amy Williams and athletic director Trev Alberts failed to ensure the coaching staff maintained appropriate boundaries with student athletes. What is the university's role there? Does that fall under Title IX compliance as well? Or that's the part that I wasn't totally sure what is the university's actual responsibility there?
Yeah, the Title IX requires every school to have and make known procedures for students to file complaints of sex discrimination. And as part of that, you have a duty to inform student athletes of their rights and really educate them on what avenues that are available to them should they be subjected. I mean, in a lot of cases that you read, it's student on student sexual harassment, or a lot of the cases outside of the Title IX context can involve the workplace, but you also have teacher on student harassment. The coach element and the athletic element to this is you don't find that a lot in the context of a management down sort of a lawsuit. So I think this is just it's very interesting, that part of the claim, that there's been a sort of a systemic failure to educate student athletes on what to do about sex discrimination. And honestly, my guess is that there was probably a huge focus on student versus student sexual harassment, because that's 95% of probably the likelihood of any problems. And so the fact is you sort of focus so much on that you might miss this element of the grooming and the power imbalance and the things that can happen with a coach student athlete type of case. And so maybe that was just a hole in the thinking or the procedures, and that might explain why this particular case has some unique elements to it where the university just didn't see this coming.
Fantastic.
Great
John,
stuff, John. We appreciate your time. That's John Kinney from Kinney Mason Law Firm here in Omaha. John, thanks so much for joining us and help us get a little smarter this morning.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, John.
That's John Kinney, lawyer here in Omaha. Really good stuff. Really interesting perspective on some of those things as well. Coming up next, we will hop back into a little bit of Creighton and UConn talk tonight and maybe wrap up some additional thoughts that DB and I have from that conversation with John here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.